Thanks, Paul. That was a great talk. I'm very interested in this whole. I think you've put a label to a lot of ideas that I'm interested in already, and I think the sort of the opposition to industrialism kind of rings a bell, and quite often, just one of the insults that's sort of thrown at this sort of idea is at this kind of thinking is that it's like a sort of neo-feudalism, and they want to sort of undo all the progress of that gives us our standard of living, and it does make me wonder sort of to what extent the depiction of sort of life under feudalism is just a sort of propaganda from capitalism, because they had to paint the system that was overthrown in order to usher in capitalism in as bad a light as possible. So actually, is was the feudal system as bad as we're sort of been told to think?
It's a good point. I think there are two prongs to my answer. The first one would be people didn't work that hard under feudalism. I mean, all the evidence shows that that the work they had to do for the lord of the manor, wherever, wasn't even wasn't every day or even every week necessarily. It was occasional work. They were just basically working for their own subsistence, or their own subsistence. Again, that's a sort of rather negative word. They were working to feed themselves and their family and their community. And no, I don't think. I think there is a lot of lies told about the past in order to make us think that what we're living now is an improvement upon that. Obviously, that it was all the Middle Ages. Sometimes you see films, don't you, when people are just sort of, there's just mud everywhere and people are all sort of diseased and hunchbacked and groaning and moaning and dying of the plague. That was the Middle Ages, you wouldn't want to go back there. But the other thing, of course, in a non-industrial society on the same level, technological level as the Middle Ages that we had, hundreds of years ago, wouldn't have to be feudal, and that happened to be the system now, then. But now, with all we know now, we don't, we couldn't possibly go back to exactly the same system, and we've got the capacity to invent a horizontally organised, rural, decentralised, deindustrialised society that wouldn't have a lord of the manor. It would have a people's. The village moot, as they used to call it then, but a village gathering where people decided what was going to be doing between themselves, and it would be, democratically run in the real sense of democracy, rather than through stage-managed spectacular elections.
Yeah. And as I understand it, anyway, like the Russian anarchist thinkers, they were very inspired by the kind of village communities, which are like very much a sort of a self-organizing, they were, they had, they were very much a self-organizing society.
Yeah, the mere. That's a great model. But there are societies like that all over the world. I mean, that's how people used to live, because there weren't central authorities, were there? So it's a healthy model for going forward, but we don't have to stick with the particularities of it. Mm.
Thanks, Paul. That was a great talk. Just wanted to touch on one of the things that you said about the impact of the railways. Something I've been reading quite a bit about recently is about the clash of the two Americas, and it's basically the concept of the open versus the closed system, which is basically American ideas against the ideas of the British Empire, and various presidents and politicians throughout the ages have been assassinated for trying to take America in a different way, in a different route. And one of the big thinkers of the 19th century was a guy called William Gilpin, who was allied with Lincoln, and he had the idea of the Cosmopolitan Railway, which was to go across the strait to Russia and to basically ally America, Russia and China together. And it was basically fighting against the British concept of the maritime system, where the Brits controlled the seas. The idea is that the open system with building the railway across the strait, sorry, I forget the name of the strait. Does anyone know? The Bering Strait. That would have basically sent the world into a different in a different direction, and it would have been a world of cooperation and win-win for all. Whereas we've been constantly being pulled back in to the system of empire. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on those ideas.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that particular vision. Yeah, but maybe at the time it might have led to that. Yeah, but I mean now things have changed, and when now with BRICS, when you've got this idea of a so-called
this is kind of trying to re-energize those ideas.
Yeah,
I think. But
unfortunately, we can see that the BRICS agenda is very much in line with the World Economic Forum agenda. If you look at their last declaration last autumn, it goes on and on about sustainable development goals and the rest of it, and it's quite clear that that same empire that they were trying to escape from by looking across the Pacific rather than back to London has now taken over even the Chinese system. I'm pretty sure of that. But, when I've looked into the details. And so it's not so much an escape from that empire as just a reshaping of that empire, like when a big company changes its headquarters from one country to another. It's just they're just shifting.
So you think that BRICS is intrinsically linked to the ideas of the WEF?
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems clear to me. Well, it is clear to me that it is. It was invented, the term BRICS, although this doesn't prove anything in particular, the term BRICS was coined by someone who worked for Goldman Sachs. And when you look at China, and who actually controls the industry in China, it's not the Communist Party. I mean, the Communist Party is just a sort of front behind which the usual global financiers have taken it over, which to me explains why China is so obviously the model for the Great Reset and all the smart cities, the digital currencies, and all the totalitarianism that we've been seeing, and also why COVID started in China. I mean, this is a new centre of operations, as I understand it. Is that there's a very interesting book by a Dutch writer called Meis Bargen, called The Predators versus the People, and he talks about the whole history of this empire that we now currently know as the American Empire, which was previously the British Empire, and before that was based in Holland, in Amsterdam, and before that he traces it back to Venice and Genoa. And he says the same thing there, that the next step is that it's going to China, because it's not a power that is based in any particular place. It's a money power. So I'm saying that because I've been looking into that lately, the BRICS thing, and I've become convinced that it's quite obviously the next stage of this thing. But going back to your example, at that time, it was possibly it would have been a breaking away from the City of London and
Well, I think it's been attempted sort of multiple times, and it's been reincarnated over the course of several generations. And I'm not an expert on it just now. I don't pretend to be, but it's something that I'm reading into. And there's been various political assassinations over the years to try and prevent the breakup of the British Empire, which is essentially globalism, and the American idea, which was to try and have a world that was more in tune with one another, and sort of a spirit of cooperation where everybody wins.
My opinions have changed about America over the last few years, because I generally always saw the thing oppressing us here as being American, and like a lot of us do. And then I've realised, no, actually, America was the one being oppressed by London, in fact, and then a lot of their politics was about trying to get free from that influence. So.
Well, a lot of it is, I think, it's infiltration from within, and the same powers that held power 300 years ago still hold them now, and there's been so many times in the past where I've instinctively gone, America should be razed to the ground, it's just a bomb scare, but it's not really America, it's something else, it's forces that are sometimes beyond our comprehension, I think. Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks.
Paul, many thanks for a fascinating talk. I mean, that was an incredible tour of philosophy and various writers, so thanks for that. My question is that to make organic radicalism happen, to be a practical proposition, it seems to me that there needs to be a method of actually seizing enough power to, for example, gain access to necessary land for common folk to sustain themselves in communities along the lines you're talking about. So do any of the writers that you've studied, do any of them talk about the political and actually process of actually getting the necessary power to seize and sustain control of the necessary resources to enable the vision you're talking about?
Well, like Landau, who I mentioned earlier, one of his ideas was of building parallel societies, which I suppose was what Gerald Winstanley was doing back in the 17th century as well, which I think is more realistic than thinking that we could seize control of the power up there. Is to seize control of our own lives where we are. I mean, that's what we actually are, real people in real places with a real physical presence. And if we get together with other people, we can at least very temporarily claim back something and start a project. And then the question is, well, when are they going to come in and try to stop us? Which obviously they always do. But what I think is, if enough people do it at the same time, and if there really is this zeitgeist, this spirit that people are going to do that we've reached the point where we've got to do that, and we all know we've got to do it, then they can't actually do anything, because there's just too many. They've no matter how much money they've got to spread around, they can't actually stop us. So I think it's got to be something on that scale, really, a sort of earthquake from below.
I mean, there's various theories of power. One is Nima Parvini talks. He talks about the theory of elites, and he too has written books drawing on past thinkers. And I guess he would be very skeptical of the idea of some kind of organic revolution bottom up. He's written a book called The Populist Delusion, which basically attacks that notion that the revolutions can arise from bottom up. They're always controlled and manipulated by elites, as history would show us. But I would agree with you. I think ideally the way forward would be to create parallel societies, alternatives, and I agree with you that if the critical mass can be achieved, then the powers that be just wouldn't have the resources or perhaps even the will to stop it. But how you get that critical mass, I'm not really sure about at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's the question. But yeah, I don't think, revolution, yeah, you're right about most of the revolutions we've seen in history have just been coup d'etats under another name. But you know, whatever you want to call it, this uprising or this reclaiming, or that'd be something different. I think it wouldn't be. But I think that creating the energy for that to happen is what is important, and part of that to me is the ideas, and also the sense of possibility, of optimism, not sort of blind optimism, but of a sense of possibility. Because if we don't think it's possible, we'll never do it. You know, you've got to have that feeling in your heart. Yes, if we try hard enough, if everybody does it, we will get there, and it's true. So it becomes a sort of putting out self-fulfilling prophecies. I think is important as well, saying that we're going to do it, and then that gives people the confidence to ensure that it will build up to the point where it happens. That's my way of saying.
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. Very interesting. What are your thoughts for the future? What do you see in 10 years' time and 20 years' time?
I see a big question mark.
Yeah, that's because I'm currently of the opinion that we have to build from the ground up. I'm not into revolution. I'm not into going and fighting. I see it as being fruitless. What I am thinking is black market and that type of way of doing and dealing with your business, living under the crap that's coming down from above, rather than actually putting your face above the parapet and getting it blown off. I think as a community, is a way forward, because I say humanity is absolutely used to doing that. Mm-hmm. It's been through this iteration so many times, you know, and I think I was just wondering in terms of your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I've no longer got any faith in the classical idea of revolution. No, I can't see that happening. No, that's right. Yeah, you're right. Anything that sets people free from that domination, that makes people horizontally connected with each other in whatever way, rather than vertically dependent on power, that just weakens their hold over us, and well, eventually, if you keep pushing it far enough, you know, they don't exist anymore. Eventually, but
one would hope.
Yeah, maybe that won't be quite next year, or you know, but,
Thank you.
Come on, Glenn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. There's I can't remember the philosopher, maybe you'll know who it is, Paul, that says truth begins with giving things their proper names. And in mentioning the organic radical tradition, you mentioned that it's been suppressed over the centuries. In fact, it's organic, it's natural to us, and we just don't know. And Paul alluded to that as well when he asked his question about the neo-feudalism, the idea that a past that we might look to for some inspiration has been denigrated and misrepresented, as if the Middle Ages is one thing, and as you illustrated, a kind of squalid thing where everyone's got nothing to eat and is like dirty and, you know, and getting oppressed by the landlord. So this tradition, when you look back over however far you look back, you see it's been suppressed. And the people that have been responsible for suppressing it have also suppressed their own identity. And I'm wondering then, we've now moved into an age where we're beginning to see who they are, but we're still using euphemisms, bankers, elites, and various other terms that actually don't get to who they are. And I'm wondering when we can find the courage, because it seems that we need this. I know in France there's an issue here because you end up in jail if you say the wrong thing, and here you're just excluded. But when we're going to identify the kind of Talmudic force that's confronting us, not just in the economic sphere, not just in the political one, but also in the spiritual, and that this force, whatever its intention is, isn't just about money and profit. There's another intention behind it. And I think we're beginning to see that now, but we're all stymied by the fear of naming it. And I'm wondering what the position is in France with that. If your own position, if you can answer that question. Because I've also couched this in terms of euphemisms for the same one too, for the same reason, because this is a public forum. So I'm just wondering if you've got a statement on that, like, we need to name who it is. It's like talking about crime, but you don't see who's doing it. Talking about, rape gangs in Bradford, but you don't recognise who's doing it, or you pretend you don't. When we can actually tell the truth about this. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I mean, I published a booklet a year and a half ago about the Rothschilds. Yeah. To me, they're at the core of it. Yeah. I mean, the fact that they're obviously they're Jewish, or they say they're Jewish, but there are people who say they're not really Jewish. They're Frankist Satanists or something. Well, I don't know. I don't actually know them personally, so I don't know. But they're certainly at the core of it. And when you look at everything that's been happening since the Gaza war, or whatever, it's not really a war, it's something else going on there, ethnic cleansing, or they want to build a smart city on the site, as far as I can see. The beach, yeah, access to the beach, and so you can see, and I think it's become increasingly clear since then that the extent to which Zionism being to a large extent, not a creation of the Rothschilds, but very closely linked to the Rothschilds. You can see to the extent to which that dominates this country and France and other countries. And I think the Rothschilds are perhaps the key to why pro-Israeli policies dominate, because they've captured so much of the power in our own country. Because it's not just the state of Israel over there which is dictating this. This is something internal. And I think it was quite horrifying to see them project the Israeli flag onto 10 Downing Street at the beginning of the thing, supposedly in solidarity with the victims of the October the 7th attack. But they did the same thing on the Eiffel Tower in France. So I think it's becoming uncomfortably clear that this Rothschild Zionist network has enormous power. Uncomfortably, because it's something we're not supposed to see, and for pointing that out, we're coming to the point where you can get arrested for pointing that out, which again tells you something about whether it's true or not, because if it was just a stupid idea, they wouldn't care if you said it, because if they weren't the people in power, they wouldn't mind you saying that. They'd be quite pleased you were saying that, because it's a distraction from who they are. So yeah, but I think it's important to point out that a lot of the opponents of Zionism, as well as a lot of the opponents of the capitalism, or financial capitalism that the Rothschilds are promoting, a lot of them are Jewish. Especially over Israel, because obviously it's particularly close to their hearts, because they don't want to be associated with it, and and they're in a part of a community where maybe most people are going along with Israel, and so they feel that burning need to condemn it. So I think, to me, it's important to, yes, identify the particular people and networks behind all this power, but not to fall into the trap that they want us to do. I mean, they'd love it if we all went around saying, "Oh, it's the Jews that are doing this. It's the Jews," because they say, "Oh yeah, we knew they were anti-Semitic. They're just stupid, prejudiced people." No, we identify. I think it's important to identify specifically who these groups and people are.
That's where you need proper definitions and the ability to actually to be clear on the definitions, and then to have a debate on it, because then you can actually identify the who. And that I think ties into a point that Stuart made when you were saying, like a few years ago, you identifying America as the source, and you see they're just as subverted as we are. I mean, there's all kinds of wars that we've been involved in, and it hasn't been any common will in this country to be involved in it at all, yet somehow or other, the British are involved, so I'm involved by default. But I'm not, spiritually I'm not, and in any sense that I cannot be involved, I'm not. Yet my country is, and I'm tagged with it. And the same way, you say, America did this, America did that. America, as we see, has got no more control over itself than anyone else. but I think there's a critical mass building up that's beginning to see it clearly. So we look to the past, and I think your description when you gave your talk, Paul, about people going through a barrier and then kind of turning around and looking back, and then seeing other people that have come through the barrier from a different tradition, and we're actually all seeing the world the same way. So we are now, my view of the world and how it's structured has completely changed from 10 years ago and even from 5 years ago. Things that I thought were discrete pieces of knowledge in their own domain, I actually see it's one agenda with the same goal. I'm not really sure what that is. Perhaps they don't know themselves. Other than certain things that they would maybe state what their goal is, but they don't even know their own souls. Possibly they don't have them. But I think there's a mass building up. We're now you're looking at the feudal past and say that doesn't really represent the truth. You're looking at all the great wars that we've been involved in, that particularly in this country we identify so strongly with, as a source of national pride. And you think that wasn't really what you thought it was about, and what happened in it isn't really what happened. And that's beginning to happen. The whole empire experience, there's lots of ways of looking at it. And if you look at it critically, you find the story isn't what you thought it was either. And I think there's a lot of us beginning to see that. And all the ideas that we divided ourselves because of, we see that they weren't really true either. Left, right, we're all really just people. Anyway, I'm not sure if that was a question. Oh, I thought of another thing. You need more off switch, somebody has to press that. You're just saying about Ruskin saying when the railways were invented, and he was railing against them, saying who would want to do that? Why is that a good idea? Just for a more modern example, I mind when I first heard of iPhones and mobile phones. I'm talking about 40 years ago. I remember thinking, what a stupid idea. Who would want a mobile phone? You can go in a phone box, you make an arrangement with your friends, you don't need to call them up to remind them. This is definitely going to die. Don't invest in whatever mobile phones. So anyway, don't listen to my investment advice. I think that was, thank you for that. Thanks, Paul. Thank you, Richard.
Hi, Paul. You mentioned there about the Rothschild family. We spoke a little bit before about them, and you mentioned how deeply they were involved with Margaret Thatcher's reforms, and obviously they're connected with Tony Blair, and you mentioned that Keir Starmer goes to the same synagogue because his wife is Jewish. And we know all these things now about, the Rothschilds. I've kind of got two questions. One is do you think the fact that so many people are being now identified publicly and so many organisations are being identified publicly, do you see that as a prelude to things, either the triumph of their power, or do you see it as a sign that this creates an opportunity for them to start breaking up, falling down, falling apart? And the second part is, obviously, the banking system, the Rothschild family, they connect the world through a system of debt and credit, so that the power reaches, through that system far further than, it would otherwise. Did any anarchist thinkers come up with alternatives in terms of currency? I mean, they have the general ideas about mutual aid and, swapping goods and so forth, but did they come up with a practical system of currency that would prevent us from having to be dependent on a banking system and that system of credit and debt?
Yeah, I'm sure they have. I can't think of the names of the people who did, but definitely a system of money that restored the idea of money as just a means of exchange would be one thing. Some anarchists talk about not having money and just about exchanging things, barter, or just nobody owning anything, but not in the Klaus Schwab sense of it. But it would be a good start to have a system of money that wasn't, because all the money that we have now bears debt, of course, doesn't it? It's lent into circulation, and so there's always there's interest to be paid on it, and so we always have to have economic growth and development in order to find the money to pay back the debt on them, on this money that is being lent into existence. But we don't need that. All you need is just tokens, really. That everyone's given tokens. There was the social credit movement, not the social credit we have now. Again, these terms just confuse things. But our Major Douglas, I think he was called. Is that anyone else remember? Anyway, I've read about that quite a long time ago. Was the idea that everybody would be allocated tokens to be able to exchange with others as a basis for using money as a sort of fair means for exchange and for buying and selling, but without that usury aspect. I mean, that's the problem with the money system is the debt and the interest and the usury and the accumulated interest where it grows and it grows and it grows, and this is the tool that has been used. When you think that the whole of the world, we're always talking about the world debt. All the countries in the world are in debt, and the world is in debt to trillions and trillions of trillions and trillions of dollars. But in debt to who? There's a planet is in debt. What, to Mars or the moon? Oh, I know. It's actually it's to the.
Do you want to go there?
It's to the. Well, I know it's to the Rothschilds, more or less, actually. But and that's the question of whether it's a good thing for them that the people they're more visible. Is that what your question was, really, or that people are known? People realise what they're doing? No, because that's the last thing they want. That's what they've been trying so hard to hide for definitely since the end of the 19th century, when they were a byword for being super rich and exploitative, and French anarchists were sending letter bombs to the Rothschilds because they were just identified as the prime capitalists. They were the top dog capitalists, so they were hated. And then I think they made a deliberate decision, particularly before the First World War, because they were involved in this deliberate planning of the First World War for profit on several levels, which I won't go into all now, but I've written about it. So it was important that they weren't identified as being involved with that, because they would have been, there'd have been an uprising, or they'd have just been, they wouldn't have been able to show their faces in public. So from that time on, they've built these fronts that they hide behind, very complicated fronts. They don't want to be visible. They don't want to be visible at all, because their power people would be so shocked to know the extent of their power that it would just demolish any idea we have of living in a pluralistic, democratic society, and they would again be held up as they were at the end of the 19th century, as being the bad people behind it all, which they are, in my opinion, behind most of it, and they don't want that. I mean, that's why they pass. That's why anyone who mentions them, like me or many others, is described as anti-Semitic. Well, obviously it's not. If a crime family, if the police go and arrest somebody who's been committing crimes on the local estate and he happens to be black or Irish or whatever, it doesn't mean they're anti-black or anti-Irish. They've identified the perpetrator, and they're following through. In the same way, if we look at who's behind all these criminal activities, criminocratic activities, to use the phrase that I use, and we see that it happens to be the Rothschilds and they happen to be apparently Jewish, it doesn't mean that it's anti-Semitic to criticise them. So that's one of the things they hide behind, the demonisation of criticism of them as being somehow anti-Semitic. So invisibility is key to them, and that's one of the reasons why I thought it was important to start writing about them and start identifying them and naming them, despite all the flack that will inevitably come with it and has come with it. Is because we just need to name them. We need to point at them and say, look what they're doing, look who they are, and look how they're trying to hide behind virtue signalling and political correctness, and all these barriers against saying anything about what they're up to. So it's good news that people are talking about them, and that their role is becoming more and more publicly known. Definitely.
Can I just ask a quick question about a guy that's been popping into my head recently? Has been Richard Branson, and it's because he gave an interview where he said I was 50 years old and I was taken into a room by one of my fellow board members, and they said to me, Richard, you don't know the difference between net deficit and or total profit and net profit, do you? And he said, no. And it just struck me, Richard Branson's 50 years old, he's a billionaire, and he doesn't know the difference between two types of profit. I've probably not got them right, but, you know. I just wonder, is one of the things that a super rich family like the Rothschilds do to hide is they create these celebrity billionaires. I don't know if you've looked into that, and these become, they're celebrated in society, and they promote these causes, and we think, oh, these people are so clever, but they're really, all their funding, all their, they're put into business by a family like the Rothschilds and used to promote whatever their agenda is.
I think so. There's a very good book by two Scots writers, Jim McGregor and Jerry Doherty. They're two books, in fact. They wrote about the First World War and who was behind that. And they talk about J.P. Morgan in the USA, which was seen by the Americans as being an American bank, as being Protestant, because people often say it's the WASPs, it's the WASPs families that control everything. But in fact, that was the Rothschilds' presence in America. I guess they didn't want to be seen to be behind this banking empire in America, A, because they were British, and B, perhaps also because they were Jewish. I don't know whether there was a lot of anti-Jewish feeling in America at the time. They certainly didn't want to be identified as being the people behind J.P. Morgan, but he was a very useful front. And it's not the first. I think Rockefeller as well. I mean, Rockefeller was a big rival, but many years ago they they could have wiped him out. But no, it was useful to have him there because he's not them. And when people say it's Rockefeller, that's it's just taking the attention away from them. We all know BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street own everything. Well, there's lots of people like Dr. Joseph Mercola and others are saying that behind that is, again, it's the Rothschilds. And that doesn't, it's completely plausible from everything that I've read. So, the fronts are very important. I wouldn't surprise me with Branson either, but I've never actually looked into him. So.
Just going to make a point. That's me again. Just following up from Matthew's point and the point that you made about the necessity for invisibility. If you're getting up to criminal things, you want to be invisible, and you want false fronts there that can take the flak. Just to illustrate this point, about 15 years ago or so, there was a picture I saw on the internet. It was styled as a Wild West wanted poster, and it said "Wanted Dead or Dead," and there was a picture of a man in it, and I didn't know who it was. And I asked my brother, who was an immensely wise and knowledgeable man with incredible will to reference, and I said, "Do you know who that is?" And he said, "No, I've never seen him before. I've got no idea who it is." Anyway, it was a Jacob Rothschild. So that's how, it was just a picture of him, wanted dead or dead, and I had no idea who it is. Arguably one of the most powerful men in the world, and I didn't even know what he looked like, and neither did my brother, who was very well informed about politics. That wouldn't be the case now, but I'm talking 15 years ago. But that's some trick to be able to pull that off, I think. Huh?
Yeah, it's worked very well. He is dead now, of course, isn't he? But the Rothschilds live on.
Yeah.
There's another layer above that.
Yeah, I know. It's like, where?
They're just the men families.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. Thank you, this young lady there wanted to ask.
Hello. So you were talking about how these centers of power, they shift, from country to country and from group to group over the centuries, talking about British Empire and then America and then, moving on to China. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on, people who want to disengage from these systems of power? How can we do that when these centers of power and the people behind them, they don't always stay the same and they shift? And, you talking about the Rothschilds, I mean, if they all died tomorrow, in some freak accident, what is to stop another group of people just simply taking up that mantle and doing exactly the same things, but it would be a different group, maybe in a different country, or, who knows? So, and how can we stay aware of all of this when these things are shifting and there is so much smoke and mirrors and things that are obscured?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, somebody would probably have been doing what the Rothschilds are doing now if they had never existed. It's not. I mean, to me, there was a whole thing leading up to their rise to dominance. Was that it was the erosion of our values of our societies, the commercialization of our society, which made it easy prey for predators, basically. So yeah, and if it hadn't been them in particular, it would have been someone of a similar kind. So you're right, I agree with you on that. As far as, ultimately, we need to be resistant to power as a whole. That is really the idea behind what I'm saying, which is, we need to be thinking about being autonomous and working horizontally, and to reject any immediate imposition. So it doesn't ultimately matter whether who is behind it, whether they live in China or America or wherever. It's to have a principled rejection of the idea of central power being entitled to rule over us, and of the idea that we're going to just go along with it because we somehow think it's legitimate and normal, which I think is why people do go along with it, because they've been told that it's always been like that. There's always been a government. There's always been people in charge. You just have to keep on. We've always had to go to work, and we've always had to do this. But it's not true. That's it's been true over the last 3 centuries or something. But or a bit more, depending on where you live. But so yeah, I don't think it matters exactly who they are, though it's interesting to speculate as to who they are. But the principle remains the same. That would be my answer on that.
Oh, thank you.
Does that answer it?
Yes.
Any more questions?
I've got a question. Thanks. Yeah, I was just you touched on the issue of technology and how it brought to mind the Ivan Illich and his idea of like tools for conviviality, and how like certain we should be kind of suspicious of new technologies and sort of ask whether they tend towards creating a convivial society, or do they imply relations of control and domination? And how do we get out of a situation where we're constantly being given new technologies like the mobile phones, smartphones, which are like presented to us as a tool of convenience and liberation, and actually before you know where you are, you're totally dependent on them. You're totally dependent on this global system that is designed to enslave us. And how do like you were saying, you're talking about sort of autonomy. Preserving autonomy probably means rejecting some technologies as incompatible with freedom.
Yeah. Definitely. But I think if you become aware of the whole picture, the big picture, and you can see where these technological innovations come in the overall control program, the agenda for control, then you're not going to necessarily go along with them. I mean, people go along with it because they don't understand. They think it's just it's the latest thing. It's convenient. But if you've taken a step back and say no, this is this infrastructure that is closing in, and then you're not going to go along with it. Well, you can try not to go along with it. I've always, for years, I've always been the last one. I still haven't got a smartphone. I'm holding out against smartphones, But in the end, they get you because you can't do anything without it, But if enough people were aware of what was behind it, well, we've just got to have a different attitude to it. We've got to just saying, no, we can see what you're doing. We're not having that. Get lost. We're gonna find ways between ourselves of living without it. Yeah. I mean, it's got to happen at some point. Otherwise, we're just heading for a total nightmare world of being locked up in these these prisons, these concentration camps, and being tapped for data, and people, these impact investors that I've written about a lot on the site. Actually, I won't try and explain it all now, but it's a way of making money out of our lives, out of everything we do. That people are investing in it. People are investing in outcomes as to whether a child is going to succeed at school or not, and whether people are going to recover from their mental health or not. And they're investing either way. They're investing in a positive outcome, or they're investing in a negative outcome, like they do this sort of hedge betting or whatever it's called. That it's just playing games, like the stock exchange playing games with people's lives. They've commodified. This is the whole impact investment thing, is to commodify our lives and turn them into markets from which they can make money. And in order to measure these outcomes, because how can you measure whether somebody's recovered from a mental health issue or whatever? They need to monitor everything in their life. They need all the data. They need them wired up. They need them putting their whole life on a smartphone, or checking in and doing little questionnaires and ticks and being on the screen the whole time. That's why children's education has to be online all the time. It's all online because it's all being monitored, and the reason it's being measured is so that they can commodify it and make money out of it. So people just need to understand all of this and refuse to go along with it, because it's just horrific. It really is horrific what they've got lined up for us.
Okay, Paul, well, I think you've been given us an absolutely fantastic talk. As usual, I've learnt an awful lot. Just in those last few minutes, my mind has expanded. In science, it's really important that we have proper definitions of things, and we have proper names for things, and something which we all understand what it means. And now I understand what the organic radical tradition is. Thank you very much. I think I've got something to go for, and something I wouldn't be ashamed of, because I've got a proper name for it, and I've got a proper definition of it, and it's something that I want. So thank you very much indeed for showing us the way. Thank you.